The cafe buzzed with laughter. The aroma of cardamom tea filled the air. Mark held Sarah's hand, his eyes sparkling with love. He was about to reveal a surprise, a trip they'd longed for. A sudden harsh voice shattered the warmth. Two officers stood by their table, their faces grim.
Mark Evans.
One barked, his hand gripping his baton. Mark's smile evaporated. His fingers instinctively tightened around Sarah's. Fear flickered in his eyes, a question before the accusation.
You are under arrest for possession of narcotics.
The officer's words were cold steel. Mark's face drained of color. Sarah gasped, her world tilting on its axis. Denials tumbled from Mark's lips, each one met with stoic silence. Mark was dragged away, his pleas for explanation echoing through the stunned silence. Sarah, paralyzed with fear, could only watch as the love of her life vanished into the waiting police car. The police station reeked of stale cigarettes and despair. Sarah paced the waiting area, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Hours crept by, each tick of the clock amplifying her fear. A gruff officer, his name tag barely visible beneath layers of grime, approached. He spoke in hushed tones, his eyes filled with knowing cynicism.
First-time offense. Could be a misunderstanding.
Hope flickered in Sarah's eyes, only to be extinguished by his next words.
These things can be settled.
He mentioned a figure, exorbitant and impossible. A bribe. The blood drained from Sarah's face. Her life savings wouldn't even come close. The officer, mistaking her silence for contemplation, leaned closer.
Love makes you do crazy things, doesn't it?
His words were a punch to the gut. Sarah looked at the officer, his face a mask of practiced indifference. Desperation gnawed at her. She had to save Mark, but at what cost? Night had fallen, cloaking the city in shadows. Sarah walked down a desolate street, her every step heavy with dread. The officer's words echoed in her mind. The sum, the deadline, the promise of Mark's release. A car slowed beside her, its headlights momentarily blinding. A man's voice, gruff and impatient, sliced through the silence.
Get in!
Sarah hesitated, her heart pounding against her ribs. The man's face, barely visible in the dim light, held a chilling impassiveness. She had no choice. The car's interior was dark and suffocating. Sarah sat on the edge of the seat, her hands twisting in her lap. Each passing streetlight cast grotesque shadows on the man's face. Fear had her in its icy grip, but a steely resolve began to form in its depths. The car screeched to a halt in a deserted alleyway. The man pointed to a nondescript building, its windows dark and lifeless. She clutched the small bag containing everything she held dear. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dampness and fear. A single bulb cast a sickly yellow glow, revealing a sparsely furnished room. Sarah placed the bag on the desk, her hand trembling. The man opened it, his gaze lingering on its contents. A sad smile played on his lips. He counted the money with practiced ease, his eyes never leaving Sarah's. Meanwhile, at the police station, a gruff voice whispered, "You're free to go." Mark stumbled out, blinking at the sudden light. Relief washed over him, followed quickly by confusion. He hadn't even seen a lawyer. He walked towards freedom, his mind a whirlwind of questions. Mark emerged from the police station, blinking in the harsh sunlight. Relief flooded him, quickly followed by the joy of seeing Sarah waiting for him. He ran towards her, his heart soaring, but his joy was met with a hesitant smile, her eyes red and swollen. "Let's celebrate," his friends cried, pulling him towards their usual haunt. Mark hesitated, wanting nothing more than to hold Sarah, to understand the fear etched on her face. But the pull of his friends, the relief of his newfound freedom drowned out his concern. He laughed and joked, the nightmare at the police station fading into a distant memory. From afar, Sarah watched. Her heart ached, the sacrifice she had made a heavy weight in her chest. She saw the joy in his eyes, the relief in his laughter, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. Days turned into weeks. Mark reveled in his freedom, his life seemingly back on track. Yet a shadow lingered between him and Sarah. Her silence, her withdrawn demeanor gnawed at his happiness. One evening, unable to bear the distance any longer, he confronted her. "How did they let me go?" he asked, his voice filled with a dawning realization. Sarah's eyes welled up, but she remained silent. Mark's confusion morphed into anger, his voice rising in disbelief. "What did you do?" The truth tumbled out, each word a nail hammered into the coffin of their joy. Mark stared at her, his face a mask of horror and betrayal. The money, the car, the man in the shadows, it all came crashing down on him. His freedom, bought and paid for with her sacrifice. He reached for her, but she flinched away, the pain in her eyes mirroring his own. The weight of her love, suffocating in its selflessness, hung heavy between them. His freedom, a bitter reminder of all that she had silently endured.